Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session. Today we'll be focusing on building a wellbeing strategy in education and discussing all things wellbeing in schools and trusts at the moment. Got a really good panel set up today with a wealth of experience in the space across workforce, across student side of things, in trusts and in organisations who can also support schools and trusts too. But just before we go into introductions, just a bit of housekeeping for this session. It is a live and interactive session, so no swearing, please. But there is a comment section which will be on your chosen platform. So whether you're across YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, you can put questions or discussion points to our panelists throughout today's session, which will be running for about half an hour in time. We can display them on screen as such. So please do, again, get your questions in. My name is Matt McDermott. I'm the founder and also chair of advisory board for the Multi-Academy Trust Association, which is a free to join association for current and aspiring trust leadership. So let's make some introductions. I'm going to pick one out of the background now. I will go with Suzanne first. Hi, Suzanne, you okay?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
I picked on you. So just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm Suzanne Tipping. I'm currently an assessment advisor at Cambridge University Press and Assessment at the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. But I'm a former teacher as well and pastoral leader. But I really currently have an interest in wellbeing because I talk to schools a lot at the moment about our Cambridge Wellbeing Check, which helps to measure wellbeing in schools. So I'm really interested to hear from people today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Suzanne. And I will add next up, Lisa. How are you doing, Lisa?
Good, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Blatchford. I am a HR director at Viking Academy Trust. I have a huge personal and professional interest in wellbeing, and we do an awful lot within our trust to support wellbeing within our teams.
Amazing. Perfect. And Lisa also sits on the advisory board of Matter, really filled a gap in terms of that HR side of things, managing workforces, and I'm sure that we'll get onto that in today's session as well. Thank you, Lisa. Next up, we've got Sophie. Hi, Sophie.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Hill. I'm Head of Account Management at Impero Software, and I'm also a trustee of a multi-academy trust in Northamptonshire. And I'm here today because at Impero we offer solutions and software for monitoring wellbeing of primarily staff, but primarily students, but moving into staff as well. So helping MATs to understand when people might be at risk. And also with my trustee hat on, I can kind of give you an idea of how we talk about wellbeing at our board meetings and what we do to support staff wellbeing in particular across our trust.
Amazing. Yeah, so a real mix of skills there. And last but not least, Andrea. Hi, Andrea. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks. And yourself? You're not answering me
not
back.
too bad, thank you. So give us a bit of an insight.
So I work for
Sorry.
Reed Education. It's fine. I work for Reed Education as a regional manager, and I guess my interest in wellbeing is that we have to consider the well-being of our own staff, so people who work directly for Reed Education, but also that of the staff that we're sending into schools, and that's across academic and non-academic staff. So I guess I've got a twofold interest in well-being in education at the moment. So I'm really pleased to be here today.
Amazing. Perfect. Sorry, I wasn't ignoring you. I think there was a little bit of a delay, but it seemed to catch up at the end. So that's probably on myself. But to get started on today's session, I guess the best question to ask would be around where do we sit at the moment? Wellbeing is all over the news, not just for education. But when we focus on schools and trusts, whether that's support staff or leadership, where do we sit at the moment? We'll come to you first, Lisa, working in a trust yourself, and then we'll come to the others, kind of hearing from trust day in, day out. How do you evaluate where we are at the moment?
So, but through conversations, I have to say from my experience that wellbeing has never been as low as it currently is at the moment. People are really struggling. And what I would say is it's not work related. I think that there is an awful lot of things that people are dealing with that are then spilling out into the workplace, and where we have a culture of approachability and we've got great relationships with our staff, they feel more able to discuss and disclose some of those issues that they're dealing with. And unfortunately, it paints a very bleak picture at the moment. And I think that we've recently just seen the Teacher Wellbeing Index be published, and that is very representative of certainly what I'm dealing with day in, day out.
Yeah, really interesting. And I guess we'll maybe come to Andrea, who you more focus on that workforce side of things. Does quite a lot of what Lisa mentioned there resonate with what you hear day in, day out?
Yeah, absolutely. And we get a measure, I guess, twofold. The candidates that are coming to join us as an agency, you would always investigate, I guess, why they're looking to come into supply versus working in a school full time. So you get a good measure of where wellbeing sits and people's mindsets around that. And then conversely, speaking to schools and the types of vacancies that you might be covering would also give you an indication if there's an issue in the industry. And I would say that our long-term work that we do with schools in partnership is increasing, so we're having to cover more and more by way of longer-term assignments through it could be sick leave, failed recruitment drives, and that's always an indicator of the well-being and in schools not being as it could be.
Yeah, really interesting. Just before I come to Sophie next, I'll just remind any latecomers that are coming on the comments section that you're watching this on. Get your comments, questions in there, and then we'll be happy to discuss any points that the audience want us to. Sophie, your side of things as well. What are you hearing at the moment?
I think as a trust board, I've been with the trust now about 2.5 years, and I think wellbeing is now something we probably discuss at almost every meeting, which we may not have done a couple of years ago. There's obviously particular recent events, relating to Ofsted and things, which have brought that to the fore very much. But we've been discussing wellbeing for a long time before that, particularly through COVID, the pressures that's put on staff, and just generally, I think what Andrea said there about vacancies, other staff having to cover work, because we also struggle to recruit. So it's definitely very much on the agenda for really trying to understand it and help as much as we can with our staff. They are our schools, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Suzanne, you're a little bit more on the other side of things, I believe, if I'm right, the student side.
Yeah, well, as a former teacher, I can certainly relate to a lot of the things that the other panelists are saying as well. I've seen a lot relate to staff wellbeing in schools as well, and what the general feeling is. But in terms of students, I think, wellbeing is certainly a huge priority in trusts at the moment. That's not necessarily anything new. At the start of my career back in 2002, I worked for a couple of years as a learning mentor, supporting students with barriers to learning. And that was often linked to well-being, whether it was their low self-esteem and confidence, or feeling loneliness, being bullied, or experiencing higher levels of anxiety and stress. It's something that's always been there and always been a concern for schools. But I think increasingly individual schools and trusts are looking for additional support from specialist services and just support in terms of how to deliver a whole school strategy to support all of their students, rather than just that small number of students who would present themselves, with having certain struggles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting. The other side of things, obviously, and that echoes absolutely everything that I hear from trust leaders as well. Lisa, I'm going to take you back in time a little bit here. When you first joined the trust, how did you even start going about this kind of new well-being strategy idea, which kind of blends into people strategy as well? Just want to take you back and know your thoughts on how you even started that whole process.
So I looked at our staff demographics. I looked at what particular issues were facing our staff, and then started to kind of fill those gaps in terms of what we could offer for support and signposting and that kind of thing. So I had to look at the makeup and composition of our staff and look at the particular issues that arise, day in, day out. So we're very good, like I said, in terms of workload and job design and all of those things that kind of make up the work life. But actually, it was more about what can we do in terms of bridging the gap where there is, I guess, that vacuum of support that is required. And certainly by starting with the data, with exactly what we've got, was a good starting point to start to build this provision and this wellbeing strategy. And also looking at the types of conversations that we were having with staff. Were there particular areas that were cropping up more so than others, whether it was menopause, whether it was things surrounding domestic violence, whether there were particular absence issues? So it was really starting to build a picture and create targeted support. And from then, it's then building upon. So what can we do in terms of initiatives? How can we share information? How can we really create a provision that our staff can use and have value from it? So for me, that was a really good starting point. It was to start with data and then start to build that picture of what we needed to do moving forward.
I'll just go on to the data side of things to you, Sophie, and then I'll come to Andrea around the bridging the gap as well. But Sophie, just start with that data side of things, really, how useful that can be to look at things, with no opinion, I guess.
I think with my, if I put my work hat on now, my Impero software hat on, we are working with MATs to give them access to data to really identify individuals at risk or common themes that are going on within schools, which may then feed into a wellbeing strategy. And it's using what, particularly, for example, students, what are they doing in their online lives, and how much information can that give us about how they're feeling about their mental health, and then giving trusts the opportunity to intervene when individuals are at risk. And that data can then build up quite a rich picture of what's happening, particularly with students. Getting a lot of schools and trusts now asking, can we extend that to staff as well? So that'd be an interesting thing to talk about, is how much do we want to monitor staff, to actually how much do schools and trusts want to feel responsible for their staff's well-being, as similarly to what they do with students. Actually, that'd be interesting to get
really
feedback.
Good. Yeah, definitely. And Andrea, that bridging the gap, when you're speaking with MAT leaders of what some of Lisa's mentioned there, what are some of the not requiring bundles of funding, what are some of the immediate steps that trusts and schools can take to improve well-being as well?
I think, especially if you're looking at supply, which is largely what we do, is creating quite an inclusive environment. So somebody coming into a school in a temporary capacity is welcomed as a member of staff from day one. That has a huge impact on somebody doing supply, be that long term or day to day. I think really understanding what a vacancy is in terms of why the vacancy exists, what the classroom's like, what the pressures are. Having that communication up front means that the people that are going in are fully aware and fully prepared for what they're taking on. I think sometimes when you do any form of recruitment, especially if you're struggling, you tend to put a rose tinted view on things, and somebody can come in and feel very much like it isn't what they expected. And I think that breaks trust really early on. Whereas if that communication piece is strong from the beginning and people know what they're taking on, it opens the doors for, I think, a better relationship, because it's always difficult when you're stepping into something often in the middle of an academic year, or the situation is not always as cut and dry as the start of term. You're starting a brand new role. So I think that communication piece between the agency, the school, and the person going in is really important, and making it feel like they're an extension of your faculty, I guess, from day one really helps.
Yeah, definitely. I can see some nodding heads there, obviously, as well. Suzanne, the student side of things again. What are you seeing out there in terms of the student side of things, and which you've already discussed, but what kind of best practice are some of the top performing trusts or schools really adopting now?
Well, I just think you need a similar approach with the wellbeing strategy as you would have with any of the strategies that you use in your trust, including those for academic performance and school improvement. You want to be able to measure what you're doing, and using a tool that is going to allow you to gain a better understanding of what wellbeing is like in your school. So like the Cambridge Wellbeing Check, for example, which allows you to find out where are you at the moment in terms of your wellbeing, how are your students feeling in terms of their interpersonal wellbeing, their competence wellbeing, and things like their life satisfaction and the level of negative emotions that they might be feeling. If you've got a starting point and you know where you're at, you then are in a position to identify the areas where you need to prioritize and you need to focus on, especially where, we've talked about funding there, where you do have budgets that you need to abide by. You need to prioritize what you're going to focus on. And then if you have that tool for measuring well-being, then it allows you to evaluate the actions, the ideas that you're putting in place as well, the interventions, to find out if they're really making a difference in terms of your student well-being.
Yeah, definitely. I think, Sophie, you mentioned around using that data side of things, like Suzanne there. So now I'll go around the room on this one. You might have to take a few minutes to probably think, but some out-of-the-box ideas on improving well-being. Who am I going to put on the spot first? This could be from past expertise of what you've seen, or what you've actually adopted in the trust or the school, or maybe even your own company, what you think could be adapted to the education setting as well. Does anyone want to kickstart us on that?
I'm happy to go. I'm happy to go first.
Go for it.
So we have something at Reed called the Co-Member Assistance Programme. So if you have any I suppose mental health issues, or you're dealing with something and you're not coping very well, it's an anonymous service that you can access. Reed would never be aware that you'd accessed it. It's completely private. You get you can get access to several sessions with a therapist. It's completely free, and most importantly, completely anonymous. And knowing, I've never had to use that, but I know people who have. Knowing that's there and knowing that it's completely free and anonymous, I think, is a really good tool that can be lifted across. And I think some schools have things like that, but I think if every school did, it would definitely be something. And if you could extend that to your students, even better still. I think that's something that people could look at.
Yeah, definitely. Anonymity comes into things like this, and then it's obviously having from kind of what I've heard, having that top organisation who gets that anonymous feedback, but then can action on it, and not have to pull that person out from the woods of putting themselves forward to whoever made X comment. So anyone else?
I'll go next. I'm not sure how out of the box it is, but as part of the wellbeing check, we do have a set of lesson plans that schools can use as well. And within those lesson plans, there are activities around students recognizing their own emotions, understanding them, understanding, when they feel a certain way, what the trigger might be, where were they, what were they doing, what might have caused them to have that, those levels of anxiety or worry or to feel upset or lonely. And then designing their own toolkit so that they have, their own set of strategies to help themselves. And that might include knowing who's the person that they can go and talk to when they need to talk about things. Is there an activity that they can do that will get them moving or will get them outside, which can have a positive impact on well-being? Recognizing, what do they do in their life which has that really has meaning or allows them to have personal development, whether that be, them playing an instrument or meeting up with friends or, learning something new or developing in a sport, something like that. So it's just helping them recognize, what their emotions are, what makes them feel good, what makes them, feel upset or sad or lonely, and then having their own toolkit in place to be able to deal with that, as well as knowing who they can go to for additional support. And we certainly, signpost to organisations like the Wellbeing Club, for example, who have a whole host of resources, again, which can be accessed by, school staff or parents or students themselves, if they just want that little bit extra information or some activities to do, which are going to help them.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'll come to Lisa or Sophie for another quick point. And we've had a question in the chat as well, so we'll get to that after. So Lisa or Sophie?
Yeah, I'll go if you don't mind, Sophie. I would say we've got obviously employee wellbeing programs, so as employee assistant programs. But what happens once staff are dealing with issues? There's often a little bit of a gap there. So what can you do while there is that gap between staff reaching out for support and then accessing that support? So just look at your internal pipelines of support. Ensure that you've got adequately trained people, whether it's your line managers, it's wellbeing champions, anyone that is a particular key person that they know to go to that can just deal with those issues in the immediate before then they can move on to other areas of support.
Yeah, amazing. Sophie, I'm going to come back to you shortly just on another question as well. You might even have some input on this question that I'm about to show up on screen. So this is from Julie Carson, really good question. Julie is Director of Education at Woodland Academy Trust in Kent, or she is based from Kent. I might be getting one of them wrong. But has anyone started using AI to support wellbeing and workload? And if so, what has the impact of this been? Now, we can all answer this in probably different ways on what we think education can use it for and what we personally maybe use it for. I do. That's one of our key pillars for this year on Matter and how that can support on workload. I personally see a benefit on workload, in particular admin tasks, I would say. But any other comments from the rest of the panel on that?
So we've started using AI within our software products to understand context. So Imperio Software does keyword detection, which you may be familiar with, which is really looking at what primarily students, but potentially staff are typing into their devices or looking up on the internet. And where there's a word that we're worried about, like suicide, then it will create a trigger or an alert to someone at the school. What we're using AI for is to understand the context, because just having some simple word triggers to kind of demonstrate that there's a potential issue or a potential harm isn't really enough, because as we know, particularly within safeguarding, that it's all about what is the context in which that's being used. So our AI engine is learning the difference between, for example, I mean, I always use this one as an example. I know it's not really a wellbeing one, although it might be, is the difference between if a student types in, where can I buy a gun? Well, we really want to know about that. That's really worrying in a school. Where can I buy a water gun for my year 6 water fight, year 6 primary school end of water fight? We don't need to know about that one so much. So we're really using AI to learn and understand how we're using our computers, how we're on the internet, to understand the context, which will just make that really much more efficient and powerful for schools.
Definitely. We've had another question come in as well, but any other comments on the AI side of things? I know it can be quite a scary one to probably always put your hand up to and admit of use, but we're certainly seeing more patterns in trusts to using it.
We have developed a AI tool that you can help generate interview questions with, and that's really, some schools are using that to help with their interview questions when they've got a big round of interviews, and it's really good. We've had some incredible feedback. So the second half of that question was workload, so I just thought I'd touch on that briefly, because it's definitely helped. And it's quite a good tool.
Perfect. Well, Julie said thank you, so clearly she got some really good answers there. The next one now, a strengths-based approach to well-being is also empowering, knowing that explicitly developing creativity, curiosity, perseverance, and so on can reduce stress and anxiety and increase confidence can be so important for young people and staff to be aware of. I'm going to come straight to yourself, Suzanne, on this one. I think you're best placed, obviously, on the student side of things. Sorry, I'll leave that back up there. Any comments on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I know that's something like from personal experience as well. And that was something that I mentioned when I was talking about the lesson plans, just helping students understand what their strengths are, realizing that having something that you're working on in terms of your personal development or something that is a meaningful activity to you, and, feeling that sense of achievement when you do well, or just enjoying the therapeutic aspect of doing something creative or learning something new can really, you're absolutely right, have a positive impact on anxiety, and it can increase confidence. So that's certainly one of the areas that we focus on in one of our lesson plans. And I know that some schools are, developing their own curriculums in terms of well-being, understanding what it is and the types of activities that you can do to have a positive impact on it. So certainly, those creative activities and activities that build confidence are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, gosh, we're already up to past. These always go really quick. But I think we could all probably contribute to this question. It's actually from Governors for Schools, who looking to partner with at Matter in hopefully the coming weeks, actually. Now, we all know about teacher well-being and that side of things because it's been such mainstream news, especially in the last year with industrial action and the reasons why they're striking, not just being about pay, for example. It's been about workload, which we've discussed now. I want to touch on the senior leadership side of things and how it can be a bit of an island at times, using a CEO as an example. And they have a key question for consideration, which is, what part does the governing body play, and also I imagine trustees, in supporting the mental well-being and capacity of senior leadership? And I think, Sophie, you mentioned around being on a board. What part and what involvement do you see across the board on supporting head teachers' well-being? We mentioned earlier there around, obviously that being mainstream news with Ofsted as well.
It's absolutely massive certainly from our board perspective, and supporting the SLT and the senior leaders in the trust. As you say, it's quite a challenging role. The CEO role in particular is incredibly challenging, the different numbers of scenarios that you have to deal with. We monitor that very closely. I mean, it's, in a way, it's a tiny bit easier because we see that person, particularly at our board meetings, if it's the CEO, for example, on a regular basis. So that's a really good way of identifying for that particular person. But we seek at every board meeting what's the view from the SLT. We understand that they're stretched and that they're challenged. So it's a big one for us. One of the things that we've done as a board is we've invested in what is the equivalent of personal coaching. So, a day with a consultant so that the CEO can talk to that person. And I think there's a couple of other members of the sort of senior leaders in the trust as well. They can actually talk to a leadership coach, that kind of person, and really understand how they can give them some support around their role. So very much personal support for those particular individuals has been one of the things we've invested in this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, I saw you just nodding away there a little bit as well. Clearly some of that resonates with your trust, but how does your team and governors support that SLT top level as well?
So much like Sophie said, through coaching, the medium of coaching really is amazing for well-being. And much like what Selena posed as a question earlier, using a strengths-based approach for increasing kind of that self-efficacy in terms of how they manage their workload, how they manage their own well-being and that kind of thing, and it's exploring some of those areas for development within those members of staff. They have an amazing job, but also they have an awful lot that they have to navigate, and it's about making sure that there are huge resources of support there available to them. And I've trained as a coach. That's one of my aspects within my role, is to support our leaders to ensure that they can do the fabulous job that they absolutely do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Andrea as well, just a comment on that, and then I'm going to display this at the same time as well, which is Julie again making a comment.
In terms of our senior leadership team, we've also had access to training and coaching, and we've got lots of places we can go for emotional well-being. But in terms of our development and looking at it from a strengths-based approach, we're pretty good at, throughout the SLT, dividing the things that we need to do to people who are particularly strong in that area and maybe people who are needing to develop in that area, so that those people can work in collaboration together, one with quite an amount of confidence, but the other one confident that it's not all on their shoulders and it's something that they're going to learn on. So collaborative, I suppose working with people's strengths and areas of development is something that we've been really good at, especially since the pandemic. I think people have become much more honest in their needs since the pandemic, and certainly our increased collaborative working has had a real impact on our SMT.
Yeah, amazing to hear. That's really good. Obviously, a great comment there from Julie, clearly talking about Julie's trust, how they are using very similar methods. So, of course, we would encourage that. That seems to be really good practice. Any comments on that as well, Suzanne, on the well-being?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an area of expertise for me, but, I have worked in a school where we have had coaching services as well, and we've also had I've had coaching from outside of the school setting as well, from somebody who was separate from the school, and I just think it's really important to ensure that there's that sense of culture that encourages positive well-being, and is looking for everybody at every level of the organisation to be supporting each other's well-being and making sure that, whether that be in terms of workload or feeling comfortable enough to actually talk about areas where they might need support, and make sure that that's seen as a strength in itself rather than a weakness asking for support, because of course it's the best thing that they could do.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say, and we already have to wrap up, these sessions always go really fast, even though I feel like we've got through a lot. We've actually got through only a kind of few select questions, really. But I was speaking to a trust leader at a conference of ours at the beginning of this month, and it's about how things were in the trust, and they were quite brutal in their feedback of how stressful it is, how busy it is at this time of the year. You're trying to cram everything in before that Christmas break. And another trust leader came across and was just seeing how one of their most useful exercises, and this feels like teaching people to suck eggs here, but one of the most useful full-on exercises that they did this term was a proper scheme of delegation. And he made a comment around how we are a sector of helpers. Everyone wants to help and like do way beyond what their job is. They've been doing that for years. And it made him realize that he worries about things that are not actually what should be his priority and on his list of to-do jobs. And I thought that was quite interesting when I think back to my mum, who was a school business manager and probably worried about way too many things outside of her remit. Yeah, I don't know if any of you have kind of a comment on that, just to finish off around, I guess, job roles. No, all good. All right. Yeah, well, I'm sure that all of you would be very happy to take on any questions outside of this session. I'm sure that there's other comments to come. We actually get a majority of the viewers in the hours following this session. So if anyone does have questions for any of our panel, I'm either personally happy to connect or, of course, reach out to the panel members here if you're all happy to do so. But yeah, with that, I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. See you soon.